Hello and welcome everyone to Liam's Lyceum. I'm your host Liam, aka Himbar, and today I wanted to do a review on camera, which I don't ever do, but I wanted to talk about a 1920 short story. It is by Webb Du Bois, I believe is how he said his name, who is one of the founders of the NAACP, which is the National Association for Advancement of Colored People. He was a sociologist, a socialist, Pan-Africanist, civil rights activist. He was born in 1868, so during Reconstruction, and passed in 1963. During the heaviest years of the American Civil Rights Movement, the 1964 Civil Rights Act being enacted about a year after his death. Well, he did many things in his long life, including meeting with Chairman Mao, um, interestingly enough. Uh, Today, I want to talk about a short story of his. The story is titled The Comet. It is from 1920. It is one of the chapters in his collections of essays, poems, etc., called Dark Water Voices from Within the Veil. Its publication is noteworthy because it's regarded as a founding work of Afrofuturism, essentially an aesthetic of how the African diaspora interacts with science and technology. And this is explored in speculative fiction or generally, well, more specifically, science fiction. And so it's old sci-fi. In fact, this is before most of the science fiction pulps were out. With like, I don't know, I think Amazing came out a few years after this. So I believe All Story was out, but that didn't publish consistent amounts of sci-fi. Anyway, so the story takes place in contemporary New York. Whether that is the state or the city, it's never specified. But while I was reading it, it seemed like it was talking about the city and not the state. It's is in 1920. It's only 10 years after Halley's Comet, uh, which was again 1910 came by. I guess this comet though is not like Halley's. It's more kind of like The Color Out of Space by Lovecraft. If you've read that, kills everyone. Essentially, there's a toxic gas that comes off it, so it doesn't crash, but everyone in New York dies. Essentially, all but two people, and that is Jim and Julia. So Jim survives, and he's our main character for most of the story. It's not very long, but Jim survives by doing the work for a bank that no one else wants to do. It's an old bank. He has to go down to an old vault and get some old records when the disaster strikes, and he's actually accidentally sealed in that vault when it happens, and so he doesn't get the toxic fumes. Well, he does get a little bit. Once he gets out of the vault, he passes out because of the fumes, but it's everyone else is basically already dead at that point, so it's not enough to kill him. The tone is very grim, dour. The story starts with this protagonist, Jim, thinking about how little attention he gets, and the small amounts that he does get is a negative. This is, of course, because he is black, though it doesn't say so at first. If it isn't immediately obvious, though, he takes food from a restaurant, which everyone is dead inside of course, and he thinks about how they would not have served him the day before. And then afterwards, he feels the need to visit Harlem but he's only greeted by dead brown faces, right? So it's like it's pretty obvious that he's black, right? But I don't think it says so until pretty close to the end. When we do finally get the woman's thoughts, which are later in the story, she describes Jim as alien, and she thinks potentially unknowable. Um, Jim, well, rather, she describes her experience as well an experience of being alone, right? So even though she is with Jim, she feels like she's alone. Um, she survived the gas by being in a sealed room to process photos. But anyways, while it's science fiction, it's also rather horror. I've never seen anyone describe it as horror, but it definitely felt like it when I was reading it. The descriptions of the dead and the chill of death is rather grotesque. It's very effective. It mentions dead men, women, children several times. It's particularly gruesome with descriptions of children's cries being silenced, and there's even a part where he runs over a corpse with his car. I don't want to go into any more details because it's gruesome, but it's not at all comforting. Right? It's not a happy story, which is certainly on purpose. Right? So the differences between Jim and Julia are obvious. She's described as rich and idle. She describes herself that way, actually. He described himself as poor but hardworking. And even further on, she is human while he is not, right? That's essentially how they're describing themselves to each other when they're finally like connecting with each other. Now though he is human, but only this great disaster has rid society of this racial disparity, this racial prejudice, racism. Right. So the two are of course also akin to Adam and Eve. Obviously, there's a Christian theme there. The two seem to be Christians. Um, this is because, of course, they think they might be the last two human beings alive on the planet, and so then now all of a sudden they're like, "Oh, we're equals now. It doesn't matter about our skin color." Um, it's actually really well written, and here's a quote of Julia describing, well, kind of like it's her inner monologue um, when she comes to realize their situation. She says, "Above the dead past hovered the angel of Annunciation. She was no mere woman. She was neither high nor low, white nor black, rich nor poor. She was primal woman, mighty mother of all men to come and bride of life." Um, and it is here that she can finally see a black man, as a human. And in contrast, here is his moment of enlightenment. Memories of memories stirred to life in the dead recesses of his mind. The shackles seemed to rattle and fall from his soul. Up from the crass and crushing cringing of his cast leaped the lone majesty of kings long dead. Some great alliteration. Anyways, he arose within the shadows, tall, straight, and stern, with power in his eyes and ghostly scepters hovering to his grasp. It was as though some mighty pharaoh lived again, or curled Assyrian lord. Um, some interesting comparisons there, which I think are a reference probably to his dark skin, honestly, why he compares himself to Pharaoh and Assyrians. But then this reality is kind of driven away, though, with the arrival of an automobile. So they're not the only two alive. The family of the woman has arrived, essentially. It's actually foreshadowed well in about the middle part of the story. So we finally learn her name at this point. I mean, she's Julia, but we don't learn it until the very end. But we learn Jim's at the very beginning. Jim is threatened by Julia's people, essentially, but Julia says Jim saved her, so they're like, "Oh, you're nice. I'll give you a job if you ever want one." Everything. And he's called the N-word a couple times, kind of bringing back the actual reality of 1920 in that time period of America. Um, Jim is reunited with who I assume is his wife at the very end. However, I believe his wife is holding a dead child, though, which is probably symbolic of some like dead future because of this racial injustice. Anyways, it's a little difficult, that little last part, because it comes very quickly, literally like the last sentence. But anyways, the themes of race and Christianity are pretty evident, and it's an interesting piece of speculative fiction from the time of the Harlem Renaissance. It wouldn't be until the 1960s that Black voices in speculative fiction would really be established, and then come to popularity with, like Delaney, Butler, Saunders, stuff like that. But anyways, I've gone on too long. This has been Liam Lyceum. Thanks for watching. I will catch you next time.